Hello. After the death of Jesus, Christianity lay fallow right up until 1823, when a 17-year-old farm boy discovered a set of gold plates buried in a hill near New York. The farm boy was Joseph Smith, and the church he founded has become the fastest growing in the world. Tonight, Mormons.
Hello, I'm Marilyn West. I'm the mother of 3 children, and I have been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 35 years.
Hello, my name is Walter Childs. I am a retired university lecturer. I am married with a son and a daughter, and I have been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for over 50 years.
Hi, my name's Ryan Whiffen, and I'm preparing to serve a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, to give a little back for what it's given to me.
I'm Anne Perry. I write Victorian mystery novels, which have been translated into many other languages worldwide. I've been a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for 31 years.
Hello, my name is Joe Livingston. I live in London with my wife. We are here for 18 months serving as missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Hi, my name is John McGregor. I'm one of the many Scots living in London. I'm a member of the Mormon Church, have been for 20 years. Used to be an actor, now I work for the International Tennis Federation.
So, Anne, is it true that the Mormon Church is the fastest growing in the world?
I believe so.
Well, why?
I think one of the reasons the church is growing fast is more and more people are getting to hear about the church. I think there's something like 40,000 missionaries all over the world. The church is a very evangelical church, so there's people going out there telling people about the church. So even just on a very statistical level, there's lots of people who are now finding out about the church who didn't know much about it before.
And the missionary work, obviously that's something that a lot of people know about, and also sometimes get a little bit annoyed about, I think.
That's the tracting.
Right.
Knocking on the door.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And you've done it. So you're about to do it, right?
I'm in 2 years, yeah, I'm going to be going to do it. I'm doing a lot at the moment, going out with the active missionaries that are in my ward and getting experience of it.
You're in training, missionary training.
I'm sort of preparing.
Mm-hmm. So you're allowed to? Are you just kind of watching it, or do you?
I go out and I go and talk to people. And I knock on the door or speak to them. So I'm just trying to get as active a role as possible at the moment, before I actually go to serve a full mission.
But with supervision at the moment.
With supervision.
Yeah. Was it nerve-wracking your very first?
Very, very nerve-wracking. Because you don't know who's on the other side of the door. You don't know what the response is going to be. But generally, the response is always it's always pleasant.
I wouldn't say it was always pleasant.
I've done some door knocking too.
It's quite a tough experience actually, and I served the mission for 2 years, and I lived in Scotland when I was called to serve a mission, and for some reason I thought I was going to serve in Wales or something, and all my friends started to get called to all over the world basically.
In cushy Wales.
And I don't know why, don't ask me why, but I thought Wales, and then people went off to New Zealand and all sorts of places, America. I thought maybe I'll go to Washington. And then eventually I got my call and I was to go to Scotland. And I thought, I'm in Scotland. How can I go to Scotland? And so, but I spent 2 years in Scotland, and as Scotsman in Scotland teaching Mormonism was quite difficult, quite a challenge. And but most of the people, you get the stories about Mormon missionaries, and I'm sure the Jehovah's Witnesses get it as well, and all sorts of people, that when you knock on a door and someone doesn't want to hear what you have to say, they close the door and the missionary will stick his foot in the door. Don't close the door. I mean, it really is nonsense, because you only want to speak to the people that want to listen, and the people that don't want to listen, then fine, you just go away. But it's quite tough. It's a character building experience, and it takes a lot, because the majority of it is actually rejection. A lot of people in the world are fairly generally apathetic about religion in general, and they have a picture in their mind of various religions, and people have this mental picture of what Latter-day Saints or Mormons are. In fact, most people aren't even familiar with the term Latter-day Saint.
What do you think is the mental picture?
Some people think that Mormons have, several wives, or that we've got peculiar beliefs that are non-Christian beliefs.
They think we're not Christian.
Yeah, a lot of people think we're not Christians.
But how anybody could think that the Church of Jesus Christ is
yeah.
not Christian completely defeats me. But there
It's because
is.
they don't even know the official name of the
Yeah.
church.
But so in broad strokes, how does the Mormon Church differ from a traditional Christian church? Well, when I say
Me?
yeah.
The basic difference that matters most to me is that most traditional Christianity believes that the fall from Eden was a bad thing and that we should get back to that stage of innocence if possible. We believe that it was the most marvelous thing. It was the beginning of the great adventure of growing up, and that it is absolutely necessary for all human beings to taste of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. It is necessary that there must needs be opposition in all things. We must understand the bitter and the sweet, the evil and the good, in order that we may make an informed choice and grow up and move forward from there, onward. You can never go back. It's like trying to go back to the womb. It's great to be an infant when you are an infant, but you must grow up. And if the parent who loved you were to carry you throughout your life, you would never learn to use your legs. And as much as God loves us, he will never take from any human being their free agency, their opportunity to grow up and fulfill the measure of their creation. And if we choose rightly, that's wonderful. If we choose wrongly, that's a grief, but he will never take that from us. And to me, this is the most beautiful and exciting and wonderful thing that could ever happen. And I believe that God watches over us and will help, but never take from us our agency. He has kept a prophet on the face of the earth for us, for our instruction, and left scriptures which have been preserved, sometimes at the cost of many, many people's lives, that we may learn. He is there if we will pray and seek, but we have to do the growing.
John, I think that Anne touches on one of the most critical parts of the restoration of the church, and that is that there is a prophet on the earth today, similarly as there was at the time of the Savior, and as there has been through history, throughout biblical history.
There's an actual person.
There is indeed a prophet on the earth today who receives revelation from our Father in heaven on an ongoing basis.
And just one person.
Well,
If I could just interrupt there, probably most people are not concerned about the structure of the church that they affiliate themselves to. As a seeker after truth for a number of years and experiencing many different religions, I couldn't understand why, for instance, there were no 12 apostles in the religions that I experienced. So I began to think about this and wonder whether there was a church here upon the earth that had 12 apostles, because Christ set a church up with that kind of organization. It was important to him. It's important to me. So yes, we sustain Gordon B. Hinckley as the current prophet president of the church, and he has two counselors, and we call them the First Presidency. And then there is a council of the 12. There are 12 apostles, and they perform the same kind of labor in contemporary terms that the apostles performed in former days.
Have any of you met Gordon B.
yeah,
Hinckley?
many times.
Do you?
Yes.
Oh, many times. He was present at the dedication of the Preston Temple, which is our latest building for doing temple work in the north of England.
you see, everybody's entitled to revelation. You're entitled to revelation, I'm entitled to revelation, but only in the sphere of our responsibility. President Hinckley is entitled to revelation for the entire church, for the organization, and for all that goes on within the church, whereas I'm entitled for revelation for my family only. And I feel that I receive it regularly.
But if you were to wish to know the truth of something, and you were to seek it earnestly, you would be entitled to revelation as well, as would anybody.
Exactly.
And I expect all of us here
Yes.
have had witness of the truth of certain things we've sought.
How do you know when you're ready to be entitled to revelation?
I don't know that you do.
And is it happening consciously?
Oh, yes. If your religion is a religion as opposed to just something you do on Sunday, it has to be the most important thing in your life. If there is a God, could there be anything else in your existence as important as trying to find him, understand him?
I think it's important to recognize, too, that adhering to these principles and being what we classify as a good member of the church takes a great deal of effort and determination. Yeah. There are principles that are unaltering that you need to abide by. I have a story about my son when he was a very little boy, 4 or 5 years old, and I came home during the middle of the day and he was putting rocks into his cart, and he had washed the rocks. And I said, well, what are you doing there, Lee? He said, well, I'm going to sell these rocks. And I said, Lee, you can't, nobody's going to buy rocks. But I came home that evening and he wasn't there, and his mother was worried about him. We were ready for dinner, and so we went out and we found him, and he came and he showed me what he had in his pants pockets. It was full of money.
He sold the rocks?
He sold the rocks. Well, he taught me a great lesson, and that is that determination really pays.
Yeah.
And determination to live the principles of the gospel. In Ryan's case, I think he'll need to be determined to be a good missionary.
And you tithed him on his income, right?
Absolutely.
Can I just, since we're back to missionary work again, which is so important in our church, perhaps I hope the camera can pick this up. That's my grandson, eldest grandson. He already looks like a missionary there. We saw him off from the airport, and he flew to Provo in the United States, which is near Salt Lake City, into what is known as the Missionary Training Center. And there are, I think he said, 30,000.
Well, that's the number of missionaries. We have 40,000 missionaries around the world, but there are 3,000 or 4,000 in that training center at any one time.
He is there, learning to be a good missionary, and all those things that can contribute to that state, as well as perfecting the language, because he's not only got to go to France to preach the gospel, he's got to preach it in a language that he's not terribly equipped at the moment. And this is the most wonderful thing, that they do go all over the world. You just imagine what 2 years engaged in that activity can do to a young person.
But we all have different missions, and I believe mine is involved with my writing. Yours will be involved with raising your family.
That's right.
And when did you tell us what you're planning to do?
Well, I don't know. Just before I do that, I think it's important to say that it's not just men, young men that go on missions, because we have sister missionaries too. I mean, my sister went on a mission hundreds of years ago. She was the first English woman to go overseas on a mission. She went to the Alaskan Canadian mission. And that was a long time ago, 30-odd years ago. So it's not just young men that go out. My mission in life, I love being a mother. But I'm at university now, and my major is in post-compulsory education and training. And what I feel my future mission to be is something to do with perhaps adult literacy.
If you could open the world of words.
Oh, I'd love to.
To even one person.
Yes.
What a gift.
Be great. And I'm the animated crazy one. I don't care. I can do all the nutty, cutesy things to implant it in the mind.
What sort of things?
Oh, you put me on the spot now. But I mean, there has to be. I think when we're teaching somebody a concept, visual things are so much more important instead of sitting labouring just over the books. May
I give you a suggestion?
Yes.
My mother, before she retired, she's now 86 and she did retire when she was 79, used to teach adults who were mentally and physically handicapped, very, very seriously, never leave an institution. She taught people who had previously been considered absolutely ineducable how to read and write, and she did it through cooking.
Right.
Because you'd find people, I mean, it doesn't matter how seriously handicapped you are, if you can eat.
Sure.
She would teach them to make little fairy cakes.
Right.
And say, did you enjoy that?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you like to make it again? Yes. Then you need to have 1 egg, 2 spoons of flour. Do you want to be able to write that down?
Sure.
And she taught people that way. It's amazing how you can reach people, as you're saying.
Yeah. It's frightening to me. I think of these women going out to the supermarket, buy one, get one free. They don't know what it says.
Now let's talk about the morality of the Mormon Church. How does that differ from other churches? What different moral criteria do you have?
Can I come in that straight away, because you cannot separate that from the sanctity of the family. The presidency of the church, which we've referred to earlier, the prophet and his counselors and those that work with him, were so concerned about the disintegration of the family unit in our society, the awful things that are happening, you know, so many divorces and abortions and child abuse and so on. They penned this and circulated it to every area of the church, and it's called a proclamation to the world, and it comes from the first presidency and the Council of the 12. Can I just read a few lines of it? We declare the means by which mortal life is created to be divinely appointed. We affirm the sanctity of life and of its importance in God's eternal plan. Husband and wife have a solemn responsibility to love and care for each other and for their children. Then there's a quotation from the book of Psalms. Children are a heritage of the Lord. Parents have a sacred duty to rear their children in love and righteousness, to provide for their physical and spiritual needs, to teach them to love and serve one another, to observe the commandments of God and to be law-abiding citizens wherever they live. Husbands and wives, mothers and fathers will be held accountable before God for the discharge of these obligations. And if I just finish with one other short quotation. We call upon responsible citizens and officers of government everywhere to promote those measures designed to maintain and strengthen the family as the fundamental unit of society.
Now, the Mormon Church believes, doesn't it, that children are born into sin, which is good.
No.
No, not born into sin. You're born the only way you can be. When you come into this life, you're an absolutely clean sheet. And should you die before the age of accountability, which is given an arbitrary time of 8, and obviously should you be mentally handicapped and you don't reach that age, you don't require baptism. Baptism is for the remission of sin. And in order to sin, you have to have light and knowledge and choice. And you must do something, either do something which you believe to be wrong, fail to do something you know to be right, or be completely indifferent to morality in order to be able to sin. And as an infant, you cannot possibly do this. Should you die before the age of accountability, you go straight back to our Father in heaven. And no little child can possibly be guilty of anything.
And your daughter's just turned 8, hasn't she? Do you think she's changed into a different person, a person who understands the concept of sin?
She was baptised last week, actually, and the older she gets, the more she understands. Now, I think at the age of 8, you have a limited understanding of all things, including the church, and including the covenants that you are entering into as an 8-year-old. The toughest age for kids in the church is when they become teenagers, and there's so much peer pressure on them to do other things. You know, the moral standards of the church are very high. The expectations of honesty and integrity are very high, and
chastity, which is when you're in your 20s and fall in love with somebody who's not a member. I think that's when I've seen a lot of people get caught at that sort of an age.
And in order to reinforce that, we have what we call a family home evening. Once each week, on a designated day of the week, usually Monday, we get our family together and we have some fun, but we also intersperse with that fun some principles of life, things that they can use, honesty, integrity, morality, and we have some games along with it.
And are the games Mormon related?
Not really.
Because at Jewish Youth Club, pretty much every game we played was somehow related to Zionism. I'd later discovered when I thought about it.
Some are.
Anyway, to intersperse some information into them. I remember as our children were growing up that we'd have this regular family home evening, and the oldest son probably would be on the floor either pretending he was asleep, and there may have been occasions when he was asleep, and somebody else might be doing distracting things. But, you know, in the end now, I see exactly what has happened. And that 1 hour, perhaps, a week, has made an enormous difference in the lives of these kids over a period of time. Just 1 hour a week.
This is interesting aspect that we have been accused of that you did raise concerning forcing and indoctrination. Actually, the reverse of that is true, really, because one of the great principles that we do stand by is the principle of free agency. And I can remember one of our apostles recently died. He said a terribly obvious thing, but most interesting when you consider it. He said, everybody comes to the earth with two things. One, a certain amount of time, could be weeks, could be months, could be years. And the other thing is free agency, to use that time any way he likes. He can waste it, he can become involved in crime, but he cannot escape the consequences of his choice. That's a wonderful concept when you think about it.
Except that there is repentance, and I'm sure he would have intended that, but repentance is not easy.
Very difficult.
But repentance means change. It doesn't mean waiting to the last minute saying, hey, I'm sorry. It means that you learn. It's all about growing up. In the end, all you have is who you are, what you have made of yourself.
I talk to my kids about free agency because I like to explain to them there's no such thing actually as free agency, because you are free, always free to choose what you will do. Yes. You're never free to choose the consequences that come with that. There is always a price on that. So it's not free.
All you have
says we haven't got free agency. We've got agency.
We've got agency.
Is
we haven't
who you
got
are,
free agency. That's
what
right.
you have made of yourself. All you take from this life is what you are. You cannot take any material possessions. You cannot really take anybody else, because they either come or don't come of their own agency. But you take who you are.
Well, something happened to you in your early life, Anne, which I think we should touch on for a moment, which was you were involved in I mean, do you want to kind of explain and also talk about how
really,
that...
But I did something which was profoundly wrong, for which I was totally frank with the church, and it was before my baptism, and I have been told by my appropriate church authorities that it is washed out of the book of remembrance in heaven. But not before the price is paid. And that, to me, is the most wonderful thing that a human being can hear, that what you have done that you should not have is gone. If God no longer remembers it, then it means you are free to proceed from there onwards. It does not mean that you don't have to try as hard as you possibly can, but then we all have to try. Nothing short of the very, very best you can do is good enough for any one of us. Because do we not all want to be the very best that we can? Yes. Everybody. Fulfill the measure of your creation. Be everything that you can be. You are a child of God. Your second best effort is not enough.
But did you kind of did you turn to the Mormon Church because you had committed a mortal sin, and that was
I was looking for the church that taught what I could believe. I knew it would be a Christian church. I tried, like Walter, I tried many other churches, and each one of them had something that I didn't find I could believe. And when I found, eventually I just worked out, thought, well, I'll make up my own. And I did. And then when I was living in California, I lived next to some very wonderful people who obviously had a very fine life. And they taught me, they were members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they taught me what they believed. And I thought, some things, I couldn't even remember what they were now, but I couldn't believe. But I believed that the core of it was right. And I struggled with some of these other things. And I remember Ray Barnes saying to me, don't struggle with the intellectual things, because that's all they were. They were not moral things, they were intellectual things. My father was a nuclear physicist and mathematician, astronomer, that sort of background. And he said, get down on your knees and ask God if it is true, because surely if it is, God will answer you. And I did that. And I woke up the next morning and the room was full of light. And I knew it was true. And I went next door and I said, right, I'm ready to be baptized. And he said, when? Now. And it was within a few weeks. And I have had several things that I've had to struggle with, but I have never doubted from that day. And that's over 31 years ago now.
But the room was literally full of light.
Literally full of light, yes.
In a way that normally rooms aren't full of light.
I've only experienced the same feeling once since then, when I was wrestling with a decision to make. And I fell asleep in the middle of the afternoon. It was a grey afternoon. And I woke up without opening my eyes, and I thought, boy, the sun has come out, because I could feel the light on my eyes, and I could feel the heat here. And I thought, I'm lying in a pool of absolutely blazing sun. And I woke up and it was just as grey as before. But I had my answer to my particular question, and everything's gone right on that particular thing since then.
What was the thing?
Actually, I'm a writer, and it was to whom I should sell the movie rights of my books. And everything has gone right since then.
So is that the kind of decision that God can help you make, even a decision that says work or
you should seek the Lord in everything. In planting your crops, in reaping your crops, in teaching your children, in who to marry, or what career to take, everything.
Can we go back to the origin of the church vis-a-vis Revelation? Joseph Smith himself had a great struggle. His family were embracing different religions, and It was abroad in that part of the United States, New England states at that time, and I think he was confused by it. And he wanted to find out the truth for himself. And in his personal story and his own personal witness, which will either accept or reject, he went to some woods, which are known now as a sacred grove, near his home, and he prayed, I suppose for revelation, yes. Prayed for knowledge, prayed for assistance. After reading a scripture that perhaps, I don't know how many people would have read that scripture, probably thousands of times, but it had particular significance for him. And it's in the Bible, and it was James chapter 1, verse 5, wherein the Lord said, if any of you lack wisdom, ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. And the result of those prayers and inquiries, he had revelation, and his room was indeed filled with light and a personage who revealed to him the origin of the Book of Mormon, which we have today, which interestingly enough is subtitled Another Witness for Christ, which we feel is very relevant in this day and age, where Christ is pilloried, his divinity is questioned, he's relegated to just a figure of a teacher, you know, full stop.
You had something of a revelation, didn't you, Anne? Because you used to be a bit of a ne'er-do-well, were you not?
Well, yeah, when I was before I joined the church, I used to be a bit of a, the sort of person that you don't want your children to hang around with. Or
Really?
I used to tell teachers where they could, putting it politely, go. And I'd throw books at people, chairs around. I was suspended from primary school.
Were they just ordinary books you were throwing around, or were they...
Any books I could get hold of. I mean, they tried to... This is an example. When I was in my first or second year of secondary school, they were giving out new copies of the New Testament, because they do. And I walked to the front of the hall and ripped it up. That's the sort of thing I used to do.
Did you know what you were doing? Were you...
No, I was a rowdy teenager.
Goodness. So what happened? So you know,
well, the missionaries, missionary work again. My mum's been an inactive member of the church and has been for a long time. And they came round to see my mum. They started teaching her the first discussion again, because we have 6 discussions that the missionaries teach you to explain about the church. And I was listening to it, and it was hitting me. And what they were telling me, I was listening to, and I couldn't help but listen to. And when my mum lost interest, I said, well, look, can you keep teaching me, because I want to hear this. And when I heard the story about Joseph Smith, when he got down and prayed.
The age you are now, in fact.
I got such an awesome feeling that the Spirit entered me so strongly. I was literally crying. And from that time forth, I've known that the church is true, and I haven't been able to deny anything that I've been taught about the church or anything I've read or prayed about.
And a similar thing happened to you, John, didn't it? Crying occurred also, which for a kind of tough Glasgow hard nut must have been...
I think I was going through a particular questioning period in my life. I was 20, and prior to that I'd been asking various religious questions to religious groups. And then one day, knock on the door, and 2 young American missionaries were there. Well, young, they were the same age as I was probably at the time. And it was actually quite a funny experience, because they came and knocked on the door and said, is your father home? Missionaries usually ask for the head of the home. And I said, he's not home, but if you come back at 5 o'clock, you'll get him in. And they came back at 10 o'clock the next morning. I thought, I said, well, he's not in. If you come back at 5 o'clock, you'll get him in. And so they came back at 10 o'clock the next morning, and I thought, pretty stupid, these guys.
Time, right?
So eventually they came back, and the 3rd or 4th time they came back, I said, look, he's not in, but I tell you what, I consider myself a Christian, and I'd like to hear what you have to say. Now, to this day, I don't know why I said that, because I wasn't a Christian. I was quite a wild character, really. And but I invited them in, and they shared with me the story of the church. And as they were teaching me, they had like a flip chart with pictures and illustrations, and they had an artist's illustration of a vision that Joseph Smith had. And as they were showing me this illustration, I started to feel quite strange. I started to sort of burn up inside. I just got really incredibly warm inside. And I thought, what's going on here? This is a bit strange, really. And so naive was I to religious things and religious events. I actually thought, this sounds really stupid, I really thought that the people in the picture they were showing me were somehow going to miraculously appear in the room. And I thought, this is getting spooky for me. And I was actually going to ask the missionaries to leave. I was going, maybe you guys should just leave now. And just as I was about to speak, one of the missionaries said, John, how do you feel right now? How do you feel right this second? I said, well, I feel as if I got heartburn, but it's not painful. I just feel incredibly warm inside. And he said, let me teach you about the Holy Ghost. And he then went on to teach me about the Holy Ghost and a spiritual witness confirming the teaching of truth. And so that sort of calmed me down a little bit, and I thought, okay, fair enough, continue. And so they taught me. He said that basically what I was having was a spiritual experience. I was feeling the Spirit. And because I'd never ever experienced anything like that in my life before, it was all very strange.
By the way, did you go to Sussex that I'm sure you all know that Howard Hughes surrounded himself with Mormons because he said you were considered very loyal. Are you an unusually loyal people, would you say?
I think it's more honest.
Yes,
I think he was referring to
exactly
honesty and the fact that he could place his trust in them. And, you know, that to me brings up the point that John's talking about, that, you know, these missionaries that come out, and Ryan, when he goes out, he'll go out at his own expense for 2 years, or perhaps his parents may help him. But,
or his branch.
Or his branch, the church that he comes from. But they go out with a purpose in mind. And, you know, for a young man, a 19-year-old, to go out at that time and serve that 2 years, I think is a great testimony to his belief in what he's trying to tell the people.
And he will be on duty 24 hours a day, 52 weeks a year.
Yeah.
There'll be no dating, no partying.
But when weeks go by and you've had the door slammed in your face over and over again for weeks, that's going to be tough.
Yeah, it will be tough, but you know you're doing what's right and what you're supposed to do. And if your testimony's strong enough and your belief's strong enough, like I feel mine are, I mean, the main reason I want to serve a mission is because I've been given this awesome gift, the true gospel in my life, and I have the Spirit with me, and I have Christ walking by me. I want other people to feel that, and I want other people to have that. And I'd give anything to be able to share that with other people.
I think what it would mean to Ryan if he ran into a man like this that did believe what he had to say. I mean, one experience like that in that 2-year period is worth everything.
But do you feel that you're going to be confident enough to be able to handle a spiritual experience occurring right in front of you like John's? Because that's tough. Get it wrong, and that's bad.
You won't get it wrong.
No, you won't.
Is that terrible that I've put doubt?
No, you won't upset him. He won't get it wrong. He's been there.
Yeah. And even if
I had
His
that
honesty will
experience
shine
myself.
even if he is not fortunate enough to experience baptisms, the development that will accrue to him personally is absolutely unbelievable.
We frequently say we send them out boys and they come back men.
That's true.
But he won't fail, because any honest person of heart listening to him will know that he believes what he's saying and will read between the lines.
Yeah, that's true.
It's when you try to fudge, when you try to tell people lies, when you try to manipulate that you fail.
This young man has an incredible spirit of testimony work. And he hasn't even started his mission yet. I mean,
but your own son, your son turned against the church. Well, not turned, but you know,
my own son, he
left
did
the
not.
church,
No, he did not turn against the church. But unfortunately, to this moment in time, he is not active. I said to him on one occasion, "My son, I wish you would follow my direction, my advice, and so on." So he said, "Dad, I want to do it my way." Well, he did it his way, and he got into a lot of difficulties. He abandoned his O levels and A levels, etc. And decided after a while that unless he did something educationally with his life, he was going to be at the bottom of the heap. So at the age of about 26, he went back to university, which he's just going to graduate from. And every time he had to write a thesis, he used to ring up, reverse the calls, as he was a broke student, and he would say, "Dad, will you please send over the vibes?" He didn't have the courage to say, "Will you please pray for me?" But that is what he meant. And that was deeply embedded in the young man, and it is now. And I think he's missing the church now by the observations he makes.
It happens to many.
Can we talk about the persecution? It was touched upon earlier, and the Mormons suffered terrible persecution in the early days.
Still do in places.
Yes.
A little bit of which, I mean, very brief. There was a very brief mention of polygamy earlier, but is that generally regarded to have been a mistake, an error of judgment, do you think, on Joseph Smith's part?
No.
Really?
No.
It was something that was restored for a while and withdrawn again before the turn of the century, I believe, just before.
1903.
Is it?
Yeah,
Or just
so-
after the turn of the century then? It wasn't a mistake, but it is like the law of consecration, we're not able to live it. And also, when a law produces such violent reaction from other people that the church could be physically destroyed. But
And federal laws were passed against it,
yes,
and therefore the church had to respond.
But there are many laws which are higher than we are able to live. And the law of consecration is a good example, and that had to be withdrawn.
There are
Not
some misconceptions
permanently.
about polygamy, even
2%, I
when
think,
it
wasn't
there was about 3% of the church that ever practiced polygamy, and those who did had to have the permission of the prophet. And also, if a man was asked to take on board another wife, he had to have the permission of the first wife as well. And as the Latter-day Saints crossed the plains from New York area to Salt Lake, there was a lot of people killed, and there was a lot of mothers, a lot of wives left without husbands and children left without fathers. And there was many reasons why polygamy was taken on board. The main reason it was taken on board because it was a restored revelation from God. I personally don't believe it was ever just taken away because there was too much pressure on the church. There was, as the saints travelled across the plains, they got to an area where civilization as such, the law of the United States hadn't reached there. Nobody had gone there before. And one of the facets of our religion is that we believe in honouring the law. And so eventually the law did catch up with the Latter-day Saints, as it were, and the law of the land was that this was not to be allowed.
They also took away the vote from women, which women had had up to that point, which is interesting.
That's not good.
No, we got it back again, but we had it when Utah was not a state, and then when it was, got taken away again to go in line with the rest of the country.
But do you agree? I mean, broadly speaking, do you agree with the rule of
A new law.
No, it's not. I mean, if you look through the
it's,
patriarchs of the Bible practiced it, and nobody seems to get terribly excited about Muslims practicing it.
It's a very, very, I mean, it gets heckled up with a lot of people, and it would be a real test, I think, of the genuine strength of faith of Latter-day Saints. I think a lot of people would.
I think it would be great. I've got to tell you, I am probably the only woman you're going to meet. I think polygamy would be wonderful.
Why?
And I really think it would be a law for women rather than men. And I think that it's not going to be, women will understand what I'm going to say. I don't know whether you men will, but women will understand this. No matter how good your relationship is with your partner, if I said to any woman, oh, my he's like a bear today, I wouldn't have to say any more than that. They would understand. Now, I want you to imagine this scenario. My husband comes home from work and he's had a bad day and there's cross words spoken. Maybe he didn't mean it, maybe I said something that I didn't mean, but it's not a nice situation. Now, I want the women to think of this scenario where the husband comes home from work and there's 2 of us in the house or 3 of us in the house, and one of us says, he's like a bear today. And the 3 of us will scuttle off into the kitchen, we'll be laughing, he'll be sitting in the living room thinking, I've got to be nice to these women, they're ganging up on me.
It's interesting to reflect upon the fact that those that did live it were the giants of
Yes,
spirituality
sure,
and
yes.
purity. They were the leaders, great leaders, like Brigham Young himself. They were empire builders, you know, real men in the machoist of senses, you know.
Many of their women had their own separate establishments also.
Oh, right, they did.
And worked very hard and were mistresses of their own home. And believed a great deal in education. And Brigham Young was one who's quoted as saying, educate a man and you educate him for life, educate a woman and you educate the whole family. He very much believed that we should be educated, we should be scriptorians, we should be able to exercise for the benefit of everybody, whatever talents we might have, and by we I mean women in this particular case. He certainly didn't repress women.
No, absolutely not. I think one of the wrong perceptions of Mormon women is that we are little, weak, submissive people.
Don't we look like it?
Don't we look like it? And it's not true at all. You know, I mean, I think these poor Spice Girls haven't got a clue about girl power. You know, in the church we have an organisation called Relief Society. We're a strong sisterhood, you know, like a sorority. And
Why the coffee? Why then? Because that seems like a strange law to me.
Caffeine, tannic acid.
Right, but you drink Coca-Cola.
Not much.
You know, is that not
the reason that we have
Wasn't around.
we have a health code in the church which is called the Word of Wisdom, where the Lord has given a commandment to His people that they should abide by certain ways of life, abstaining from tea and coffee, hot drinks, eat meat sparingly, you know, retire to their bed early, arise early, avoid alcohol and tobacco. And the reason that we have it, the Lord wants us to, our bodies, without it sounding too sort of spacey, our bodies are temples, you know, and if we want to have the Spirit with us, we have to be looking after that temple. One of the ways that we can look after our bodies is to keep them healthy. And the reason that we have the Word of Wisdom is because the Lord wants us to have healthy temples. The Latter-day Saints are actually the healthiest group of people in the world, actually. They have fewer heart attacks, fewer everything, basically. But it's...
Do you work out? Do Mormons work out?
What do you mean work out? In the gym?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
May I give you...
Sorry.
May I give you one quote, which please don't edit out? Man is that he might have joy. Now, you just keep that at the core of it.
There's a very interesting, very thought-provoking aspect of the 89th section, which is a revelation of Joseph Smith, about those things that were injurious if we took it into our bodies. The interesting thing about it is it was given beginning of the last century, came through this young boy, not a very well-educated young man, knew nothing about the chemistry of the body. In that revelation it states categorically that tobacco is bad.
It
should be used for bruising, rubbing bruises of cattle. Now, I thought about that for a long, long time. He wasn't a professor, and even the professors, even those with great knowledge, weren't coming out with those observations about tobacco at that particular time. And of course, he has been now proved right time and time and time again.
In fact, a funny experience years ago, I was working on the oil rigs, and I got off the helicopter, and the guy was showing me around where we were, and he said, "We've got a great bunch of guys in our cabin." He said, "But we've got one of these funny Mormon blokes." And I went, "Oh yeah." But the thing was, after that, I was a steward. I was brushing the floor, and these guys were giving it all the verbal from behind. Mormons, you know, do this. And I stopped and I looked at them and I said, "Listen, guys, there isn't anything probably that you've done in your life that I haven't done. And there isn't any amount of slagging that you could give me that the expert slaggers back in Glasgow haven't already given me. So you're wasting your time. I'm not going to preach my religion to you. But if you ever want to hear what I believe, then come and ask me. No problem."
And what did they say?
Well, they didn't say a lot at that particular time. But one by one, all the guys who were around that table did come and did ask. And I was able to teach the teaching of the church a lot.
Are any of the Mormons know?
Not that I know of, but some of them are more informed. So that's not necessarily the plan, is to make everybody a Mormon. If we can inform people about what we actually believe in.
I want to talk about Salt Lake City. It wasn't going to be Salt Lake City, was it? It was going to be on the banks of the Mississippi at one point. Am I right in saying that?
Jackson.
Nauvoo or Missouri.
Or Jackson. Jackson, Missouri.
Jackson, back to Missouri, that's right. But it ended up being in Salt Lake City. Have you all been to Salt Lake City?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it? What's
Yeah.
have you
It's a
not?
treating store.
I'm looking forward to it.
Is it a great place for Mormons to
Yes,
be?
it is. It's a beautiful city.
But it's a tough place,
Not
Salt Lake
being
City, isn't it?
around-
It's in the middle of salt pans, it's hot, it's dry heat.
Well, it was a desert.
But they have made the desert bloom. I walked in round the church buildings and it's full of the most beautiful flowers, all the same things I grow in the north of Scotland, can name them all. When I was there this spring, it was full of flowering bulbs. The perfume of them was just wonderful. And fountains playing water and statuary and stuff. I mean, it's not a dry, arid place at all.
Because of course the other great blooming city in the desert in the States is the antithesis of Salt Lake City.
Las
which
Vegas.
is- Yeah, which is
I was going to tell you a
Which is
story.
Gomorrah.
I was going to tell you a story about that. My wife and I, we've been staying with friends in Arizona, and we stopped off in Las Vegas. And we were queuing up for our bus, and there was a family next to us. Apparently they'd lived in the Las Vegas area, and they decided to leave it. And we said, why? We started to talk to them, and so she said, well, it's so dangerous, and we don't feel it's the right kind of environment to raise our children in. So my wife said, well, where are you going to? So she said, well, we're going to Salt Lake City. And we said, well, they weren't members of the church. And she said, why are you going to Salt Lake City? So she said, we've heard from friends and various people and neighbours that is one of the finest environments that we can raise our family in.
So does it feel like something of a biblical struggle? Because they're not too far away from each other, are they, Salt Lake City and Las
but
Vegas?
no, really,
Does it feel like the
there
battle
is-
between good and evil in these two?
It's quite a way, actually.
Well, there is, but you know,
It's only a few hundred miles, isn't
as
it?
John says, there's a large percentage of the population of Las Vegas that are members of the church.
And a large percentage of Salt Lake that's not.
And
Yeah.
exactly.
Yes.
And
But the battles take place in here.
Okay, I'm gonna very broadly change the subject to the notion of I don't know what the actual term is, but the hoarding of tins of food and so on, and for difficult what's it? It's hoarding
Food
the
storage. It's
food storage.
keeping of food storage.
Uh-huh.
Some people think it's that we hoard this against the end of the world or whatever. We're advised to be provident, to provide for ourselves, and to keep a storage of food. And it's against your own falling upon hard times, being out of work, being ill, whatever. But should somebody else require it, it does actually technically belong to the bishop. And should the bishop say, sister or brother so-and-so, I need your food for whatever, then you give it. And I have given far more of mine ever away, not because it was asked for actually, but because I saw a need, than I've ever eaten.
Any particular food?
Well, stuff that keeps, of course. But
that's the challenge.
Yes,
is
the
to store
wisest
something
ones that
that
I
will
have
hold.
seen have been the people who have one box, whatever size, for a year, for each month, and you rotate it. And this is January, you use January's box, and then you refill it again, then you use February's box, and so on.
A lot of it, John, is, at least my experience in it, is wheat. Wheat can be stored for very long periods of time.
It could be wheat, but it's whatever you personally... I prefer, not just because I live in Scotland, I haven't got a hand grinder. I store oatmeal, because oatmeal doesn't need anything except water with it to make it palatable. You don't actually even have to cook it.
I was under the impression that it was to do with the impending Armageddon.
Who knows? It may well be that there was a major disaster on a countrywide scale, maybe even a worldwide scale. But
It's more likely to be simply that you fall out of work. I can remember being cut off by snow for a week, actually, when I lived in Suffolk, not in Scotland. And somebody had come to visit me, a couple had come to visit me for dinner, and they had to stay for about 5 days. I was very glad of my food storage. That nothing came into or out of the village.
We don't know why we're asked to store it. We do know that the prophet of the Lord says to store it. And I think that anybody with prudent intentions would want to do that.
I think if we look at the world today, the business world in particular, where they are adopting these just-in-time management strategies, where in the past supermarkets would store lots and lots of stock in the back, and now they operate just-in-time management structures. So should there be a strike or some weather disaster, I think within about 48 hours the grocery stores are going to be empty. And what if there's a strike that's going to last a week?
People sort of don't believe there's ever going to be any disaster of any kind. And yet it was only, was it last year or the year before, when there were areas in this country running very short of water. I know around me all the reservoirs were very low. It was quite frightening, actually. The lakes and rivulets and streams were dried up.
Yeah, I lived in Warwickshire, and a couple of years ago we had horrendous snowstorms. It was terrible, and I was able to. And it was a Saturday. I mean, we'd gone to bed and it was great, and we woke up on Saturday morning, and you
up to the eaves.
It was unbelievable. My husband tried to walk up to the supermarket, which is about an 8-minute walk. I think it took him about 3 hours. And I was able to go into my street and knock on the doors and say to my neighbours, you know, I've got do you want a chicken? I've got some frozen chickens for your lunch tomorrow. Because they could never have gone shopping. So it's great to be able to do that for people.
Also, we're counted if you can grow stuff to support yourself at all. The idea really is that we should be as self-supporting as it is possible to be. And then if hardship should hit, those who have will give to those who are less fortunately placed.
OK, well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
And don't forget to subscribe to WOWPresents.